Okay, colleagues, just before we move to the national anthem, let's look for a disclosure of any pecuniary interest. Councillor Park.
Thank you. Item number 7 for the Corporate Services Committee, item 2.4. I'm going to declare conflict on that conversation. Also on the Planning and Environment Committee, item number 14 on the council agenda, 3.6 on the green agenda, as my family owns a neighboring property within a half a kilometer.
Anyone else? Just keeping in mind there were some conflicts declared last night as well. All set? Yeah. Okay. Okay, colleagues, let's please rise for the singing of the national anthem. Let's thank Deputy Mayor Hubert for leading us one more time.
Ladies and gentlemen, national anthem. O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us commend. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, save our land, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's work our way through the agenda. There are no recognitions this evening. Review of confidential matters to be considered in public. There are none. Looking at the agenda, we'll move for a motion to go into closed session for all of the reasons outlined on the public agenda. Any additions? Clerk Saunders?
Yes, Your Worship, as a result of last evening's Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, we have a matter pertaining to reports, advice, and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation concerning labor relations and employee negotiations in regards to one of the corporation's unions, and advice which is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose and for the purpose of providing instructions and directions to officers and employees of the corporation. A second matter regarding a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual with respect to employment-related matters and advice and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose. And a third reason, a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual with respect to employment-related matters and advice and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose.
Thank you very much. That's been moved by Ward 1, Councillor Van Holst, and Ward 14, Councillor Zafman. I'll come up on screen in a moment. We'll meet in Committee Room 3. And we are voting.
Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Hopkins.
Councillor Armstrong and Hopkins voted yay manually.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Okay, colleagues, we will meet in Committee Room 3. Anyone watching from home, we will be back in public session no later than 5:15. Difficult to predict, but I anticipate we'll be back much earlier than that. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we are back in public session. It is 4:23. Let's move through the agenda confirmation and signing of the minutes of the previous meeting. That was the meeting held on October 2nd, 2018. Looking for a mover. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Usher. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, that'll be up on. Please, go ahead.
Do we have to read this passage at the beginning of the meeting?
Oh, my goodness, and thank you very much, Councillor Usher. Let's deal with this motion while it's open, and I will read that, and then I will email a few people with some apologies a little bit later on today. Thank you very much. Okay, so we are voting.
Councillor Armstrong? Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
And thank you very much again to Councillor Usher. I have 2 more council meetings after this to get this right. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or call 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Thanks again, Councillor Usher. Let's then move through the agenda, communications and petitions. There are none. So we'll move then to motions of which no notice is given. Again, none. So that brings us to our reports. We'll start with 8.1. This is the 16th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Worship. I have number 14 and 15 that need to be pulled for separate discussion. Some comments, I think, that have been expressed for number 2. I'm not sure if there's any others that my colleagues would wish pulled.
Okay, so at this point, we will pull 14, that's 3.6, and 15, that's 3.7. Anything else? Okay, so why don't we deal with the balance?
With that, I will put the balance on the floor.
And I'll look for any comments on the 16th report with the exception of 14 and 15. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask a question through you to staff, just getting a little bit more information for myself on, this was item number 2 or 2.1, the contract renewal for management of ESAs. I've been dealing in my ward with a number of encroachment type issues lately, with a bit more stepped up enforcement going on in allowing this to happen. I was just curious, just because part of this contract spoke to about 20% of it going towards enforcing provincial regulations and city bylaws. And I was just curious how those funds get directed to the Upper Thames, to if it is them undertaking those efforts, or just looking for some clarity, because my understanding is it's the city bylaw officers that would be maintaining and those efforts. So just wondering how those funds get dispersed for those efforts.
Hello, Mr. Fleming.
Hello, Your Worship. Just the simple answer is the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority have enforcement officers that would in fact deal with the majority of the infractions in these ESAs. It does depend on the issue though. Sometimes encroachment issues do come back to city staff, and it can be a collaborative effort in some cases. We try and resolve issues. Sometimes it's through a zoning kind of conversation or a minor variance. But in the main, it is UTRCA that's dealing with these issues.
Other speakers? There are none. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, and I'll put number 14 on the floor, which is number 3.6, an application for 147 to 149 Wellington Street and 253 257 Gray Street. I believe there was a conflict on that. This is the application for high-density multi-unit residential there, right along the rapid transit corridor, through some modifications and discussion. There's also the inclusion of 10 affordable housing units.
Speakers? Okay. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13 with 1 recuse.
Thank you, and I'll ask the Vice Chair Hopkins to put number 15 on the floor.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, I'd like to put number 15, the home occupations recommendation. We referred that back at committee for further discussion.
Thank you. Any speakers? Councillor Turner.
Really briefly, I think referral back isn't that inappropriate. I voted against it mostly because with respect to this one, it was a question of basically creating some almost kennel provisions to the home occupancy bylaw. The intent was to try and align the number of dogs and cats that could be taken care of at a residence by a home occupation to keep that in line with the general number that could be maintained by a resident at that property of their own pets. One of the reasons we have home occupancy bylaws is to try and avoid some of the adjacency impacts where you might have a business in the middle of a residential neighborhood. We contemplate where we place businesses throughout the city and make sure that zoning makes sure that those adjacencies are compatible with residential uses. I see this one as one that it has the potential not to be compatible. When you have your own dogs and cats, you have a bit more ability to control the volume and the mess and the impacts on neighboring properties, and you're a little more accountable for it. If you're a home occupant business operator that is dealing with other people's dogs, then that becomes a little more problematic and a little more challenging to be able to control some of those things. So that's the reason why I voted against it. The referral back may address those things ultimately too, but in this case I was a dissenting vote.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13 to 1.
And I'll return it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Let's then go to 8.2. This is the 14th report of the Community and Protective Services Committee. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have not been advised of any items that any members wish to pull. So
I see 7 vehicle for hire bylaw amendments. Anything else? Want to do the balance?
Yeah, I will. Our Deputy Mayor Hubert had his hand up. So I will put the balance of the report on the floor, and I will just speak to one item, Your Worship, if that's all right, and that's item 3.2 in the committee report, which is the Community Diversity and Inclusion Strategy update. And I just want to say welcome to Mr. Brian Hill in the gallery there, who is a member of the community and the committee that worked on this strategy. So it was just an update, a really good news story where the committee has gone with the strategy, and on council's direction, they've developed a plan for implementation. And there were a number of recommendations in the report that committee saw fit to move forward with. I want to circle back to 3.1 as well. We had Mr. Abe Outshorn from the London Homeless Coalition present to us. He had a delegation before the committee, and he presented the Homeless Coalition's continued advocacy. Why are you pointing? Okay, sorry. Continued advocacy for issues surrounding homelessness in the City of London. And in particular, one of their recommendations was that we continue to move forward with the federal government to designate London an Indigenous community. And this council actually has moved that along the way. And with that will come access to funding and access to programs. And I know Mr. A.E. Boudshorn singled out in particular staff and in particular Jan Richardson for some of the really good work that city staff are doing in this area, and especially in the area of Indigenous homelessness. So that's all I want to say about that report.
And I'll go to Deputy Mayor Hubert. Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise on 2.8 or item 8, nuisance feeding of wildlife. And I want to extend my gratitude to Mr. Kosovas, his staff, to Heather Chapman and Mr. Katolik. I know the report talks about the incidence of this is low, and that's a good thing. But this does give a tool to our bylaw enforcement officers for when that situation does arise. And I'm actually, the constituent who has had this issue contacted me this week. She's very grateful that we're taking action on this. I do have one question through you to Mr. Kosovas. Because this is private property and maybe in someone's backyard, and the report makes the comment, and I quote, persons are required to remove food if it constitutes nuisance feeding, and if the person fails to remove it, the city may remove it at a person's expense. Do we have then authority, and this may apply to other areas, to go onto someone's private property?
Through His Worship, yes, we do. We have other bylaws similar to this, like the lot maintenance bylaw, where we are on the property cutting grass or removing debris, or where people are dumping.
Well, once again, Mr. Kosovas, thank you for that answer, and I think there's some important information here in the reports from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and just another tool that we need for those very occasional occurrences that this happens to the City of London. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Your Worship. I just want to also acknowledge Ms. Mary Alikakos in the gallery as well, another member of the committee that worked on this. And with that, that is the report minus the item that's been pulled.
Great, thank you. And let me just say from the chair, sometimes really important moments like this pass through council at the end of the process in just a couple of minutes, and what I anticipate to be a unanimous vote. But I see a number of people who are in the gallery today who worked on this really important diversity and inclusion initiative, and it's been years in the making. And there are people watching, I'm sure, the live broadcasts, and there were also hundreds of Londoners who have been involved in this process over the past couple of years. And so as this passes quickly through a council agenda, certainly it doesn't represent the incredible amount of time and talent and energy and passion that people have brought forward to this really important move forward for our community. And so it's great that we can share this moment with some people here in person, and I'm sure some people are watching from home as well. Thank you. With that, I'll call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
So I'll put item 2.7 on the floor.
I believe that was Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So in this bylaw, we still have to deal with the issue of the taxi drivers having to pay $500 a week sometimes to just drive their vehicles. I know we're working on that. I'll feel better supporting this bylaw when that's worked out.
Any other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. And we are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-2.
Thank you. Geez, there's something about this council meeting. I don't know what it is, but everyone seems to be just wanting to get right through to the end of the agenda. Anyway, I don't want to jinx it, but I have no idea what it might be. 8.3, this is the 18th report of the Corporate Services Committee. Chair Helmer, I hope I didn't just jinx this report.
Well, my understanding is every single item is going to be pulled, so thanks for the intro. I will put all of the items except for the last one on the floor. That was not a unanimous vote of the committee, and I expect it won't be here again.
Any speakers on the 18th report, items 1 through 6? Councillor Zafi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to comment briefly on new entry signage for city-owned industrial parks. Obviously, we've had a lot of success on this front in the last number of years, so making another way to increase the visibility of those parks, I think, is really great. And just wanted to touch briefly on item number 6 or 2.1, the South Street, or sorry, yes, the South Street campus decommissioning. And I just talked about it at the meeting, but very much appreciative of Mr. Belch and a number of our staff's assistance on this. It was one of the most complicated pieces I think we've dealt with, and glad to see it coming to an end soon.
And just I'm going to pause for 1 second. Did you want to pull something, Councillor Park?
Thank you. In my apologies, when I declared earlier, I've neglected to declare on 2.1 the London Health Sciences Centre South Street campus decommissioning, as I own a neighboring property.
Yes. Okay. We will definitely pull that one.
We're well on our way to pulling everything.
Yes. Good prediction. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to item 5 or 2.6 is the report of the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors meeting. I'd like to thank Councillor Morgan for submitting this. I think the one point of note that I wanted to draw out of this was the unanimous recommendation or position that FCM took with respect to the use of the notwithstanding clause in Toronto's the change of Toronto's council structure. I think that's a really important things for us to keep note of. It'll be an interesting time to navigate through in the relationship between the municipalities and the province, and perhaps the provinces over the next few years to come, to watch that. I think municipalities have evolved to a very mature level of government, and I think it's really important that municipalities are treated as that mature level of government. I guess, to use sensitive language, the lack of respect shown to the City of Toronto in the change of the structure of council midstream during the election is something of grave concern, and I hope that we all stand on guard for such activity over the next few years.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Councillor Turner beat me to it, so I appreciate his words, and I will say that that particular motion was worked on by Josh Cole from the City of Toronto, FCM Board of Directors, and then myself and Joanne Vanderhayden, who are obviously from the province of Ontario, to make sure that the language was not only respectful of the City of Toronto, but also open enough that the FCM could provide support to any municipality, whether it's in Ontario or beyond, who may be under attack or threat on their political autonomy. And so it was something that was worked on and supported by the FCM, and I think that you'll see the FCM stand by municipalities across the province as they work towards fiscal and political autonomy for an equal order of government. I did want to thank our staff, too, for the work that they did. Our government relations staff, Mr. Adam Thompson was there supporting the conference, and with his support, we were able to cover off all of the committee meetings, and I appreciate his assistance in writing the report as well. So I look forward to the future meetings ahead, and thanks to Councillor Turner for his comments as well.
Other speakers. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and I can't go without saying tomorrow is the legalization of cannabis, as I think it is tomorrow, the 17th. And I just wanted to make a comment to the community. I've heard a few people having concerns, and I would like to encourage people to reach out to their MPPs or their MPs to express any concerns or any comments that they may have regarding the legalization. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Let's call the Question then on 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We pulled 6 and 7.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
I'll put item number 6, 2.1. This is the London Health Sciences Center South Street Campus decommissioning recommendation on the floor.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you. I was reflecting a little bit on this, Mr. Mayor, and I think it serves the point to just sort of plant the flag on this project. And Councillor Zafin mentioned it, but this is one of those projects that takes a long time to happen. And sometimes we hear, you know, what has this council done? What have we done? Have we accomplished anything? And I would have to say that yes, we have. While this started in terms of the decommissioning under the previous term of council, we're moving forward steadily and deliberately on this. The Colburn building, we have had an application on that building. And I think we need to step back and just remind ourselves of what the vision is for that area. And it'll be transformative for the Soho area. And we just approved, Mr. Mayor, and I didn't speak to it, another significant development right on Wellington Street. And I think we need to just keep in our mind's eye what the long-term goal is and what we're going to see happen. And this is just one more step in that process, you know, to getting those buildings down and identifying and securing the ones that we want to preserve. And we look forward to the private sector coming in on future RFPs or expressions of interest that we might have, and this development continuing going. So in my mind, I remember the first look at it. Mr. Fleming, you'll recall this, of a community that goes down to the river with walkways and pathways and play and fun areas, and connecting us back to that river. Let's not forget that this is as much a part of the Back to the River initiative as what is at the Forks. And I think it's something that this council should be proud of. The next council will also be able to be proud of. And ultimately, we'll see this whole area revitalized, and we all can be proud of it.
Thank you. Truly an opportunity of a century. Thank you for highlighting that. Any other speakers? Let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries. Oh, Councillor Cassidy? Oh, absent. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1. 13-0.
Thank you. I'll put item 7. This is 2.4 as well. This is elected officials remuneration. And there's two parts of the recommendation that's coming from committee. The first part is about passing a bylaw to repeal the old bylaw we had that had the provision for the 1/3 tax allowance. As colleagues know, that's a federal change that's happened. We can't do that anymore. We're repealing that bylaw, so we won't be doing it anymore. We'll be in compliance with the federal changes. The second part is to change the mayor's salary, the gross pay, so that the net pay for the mayor is the same after this 1/3 tax piece is not allowed anymore. So there's two parts to the recommendation. The second part didn't have unanimous support. The first part did. I think I'll put A on the floor.
Okay, let's deal with A first. There are no speakers for A, so it's been moved. I'll call the question. Let's call the question. This is on A only.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
I'll put part B of the recommendation on the floor.
Any speakers? I see none. One speaker, Councillor Van Holst.
I know that some people are going to vote against this. I had considered referring it to the next council to deal with because that's what councils are supposed to do. So I'm happy to make that referral. Maybe someone will second it.
Is there a seconder? Okay, so the referral doesn't have a seconder, so we'll move forward with the main motion, the recommendation from the committee. Any speakers? Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Well, I am going to speak to this because I don't know what my colleagues are thinking on this matter. And I think the chair has positioned this appropriately. This is a federal change, something that we have no control over. And in my view, it's fundamentally a fairness issue. Secondly, I'm not going to go on at length, Mayor. Some have mentioned the need for consultation. You need to consult before you change it to lower it, as well as increase it. This is keeping the net, the take-home pay exactly the same. And I wouldn't have seconded Councillor Van Holst because this is not the first thing you want a new council to deal with. This is something that we should deal with to set the stage for the new council. This is not something that the new council should be dealing with in the first month or two in office. So I'm pleased to support the motion that is on the floor.
Other speakers? Okay. I'll call the question. And we're voting.
Councillor Armstrong. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 7-5.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let's move through the agenda. Added reports, there are none. Deferred matters, none. Inquiries.
There's added reports, SPPC.
Oh, I'm sorry, we do have the added report, but let's deal with SPPC now. And Deputy Mayor Hubert, did you want to move that? Or is that problematic for you? Okay.
Happy to put, I think, the entirety on, unless there's any conflicts that I'm not aware of. I don't believe so. Okay, I'll move the entirety, Mayor.
Okay, any speakers? It's your chance to relive yesterday. Okay, let's call the question. Oh, yep, go ahead, Councillor Helmer.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Could you just pull 8, 5.1? I have an amendment I'd like to make to that one.
So we'll move the entire report then, Deputy Mayor Hubert, with the exception of 8. Any speakers? There are none, so let's call the question. Okay, so we're dealing with every item with the exception of 5. This is 5.1 under deferred matters, additional business. A motion related to London Hydro request for BRT related information moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Morgan. All set? Okay, there are no speakers, so let's call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Slee. Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-3.
And I'll put item 5.1, which was Councillor Van Holst's item yesterday, And just because I'm sure it's on the public that the London Hydro be requested to provide to the shareholder, London City Council, a breakdown of estimated costs that London Hydro will absorb for the work required to be undertaken for bus rapid transit project, and further if those costs will impact London Hydro ratepayers.
I'll go to Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I'd like to suggest an amendment that has two parts. I sent the language to the clerk earlier, and I did discuss it with Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Morgan just to see if they were okay with it. The first part is that the CEO of London Hydro be requested to attend a future meeting of SPPC to discuss coordination of London Hydro's infrastructure needs with bus rapid transit, including estimates of how London Hydro ratepayers may be affected by these capital projects. So essentially the same thing that we had dealt with, but a bit more specific. And then a second part B, which is civic administration, be directed to prepare a report on this issue for the same meeting. Because I think we should hear from our staff about, you know, the various parts around coordination and cost sharing, and also hear from the CEO of London Hydro. I think that's helpful.
I'd be happy to second.
Okay, so it's been seconded already, but I know that there were a number of people interested in seconding that motion, so thanks for bringing that forward. Certainly not contrary, it's a bit more specific, and looks to be even considered as a friendly amendment by the mover of the motion from yesterday. Any speakers? Okay, let's call the question. Okay, colleagues, we're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-0.
And then let's do that motion as amended. So moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Look for a seconder. Zafman, thank you very much, Councillor Zafman. That'll come up on screen in a moment unless there are any speakers. And yeah, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. Just maybe a question through you or the chair to staff. The motion asks that both reports come at the same time. Does staff think it would take a long time to prepare their proportion for this? London Hydro may be ready sooner than later.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, we believe this should be returned quickly. We won't be able to make this next cycle. We can make the cycle after that, which would put us into November.
Thank you very much.
If there are no further speakers, I'll call the question on the main motion as amended. And we are voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-0.
Colleagues, we'll report out from our in-camera session, from our closed session. Councillor Usher has kindly volunteered. Councillor Usher, if at some point between now and 9:30 p.m. approximately, when you finish reading, if you grow tired, I'm sure someone else will pick up from where you leave off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's the reason why Councillor Ridley has arrived, just in the event that I get tired. Yeah. So this is from the 18th report of Council in closed session. The Council report in closed session reports that 1, on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Service and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, with the concurrence of the Managing Director, Environmental Engineering Services and City Engineer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the following action be taken with respect to a portion of the property located at 3544 Dingman Drive, further described as part of Lot 18, Concession 3, Save and Accept Part 1, Plan 33R-17198, and being portion of PIN 0820403424. A. The offer submitted to Try Recycling Incorporated to sell the subject property to the city for the sum of $320,000, subject to HST inclusive of interest be accepted, subject to the following conditions. The city having 90 days to carry out soil, geotechnical, archaeological, and environmental tests. The city reestablishing servicing to the parent parcel where it is required. The city completing a reference plan of the subject property, and Tri Recycling Incorporated providing the city with periodic access to the site. B, the financing of this acquisition be approved as set out in the source of financing report. 2, refund of offer deposit 2248622 Ontario Corporation, Part 1 and Part 2, Plan 33R-1840, and being part of Part 4 and part of Part 8, Plan 33R-18258, Innovative Park, Phase 1. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the following actions be taken with respect to the city-owned and industrial land located on the west side of Innovative Park, west side of Innovation Drive in Innovation Park, Phase 1, containing an area of approximately 4 acres, being comprised of Part 1 and Part 2, Plan 33R-18405, and being part of Part 4 and part of Part 8, Plan 33R-18258. A, the civic administration be directed to return a deposit in the amount of $26,000 for the agreement of purchase and sale. The offer on April 8, 2017, submitted by 2448622 Ontario Corporation to purchase the subject property from the city. And B, the civic administration be authorized to undertake all administrative acts necessary to release the purchaser and the city from all terms and conditions as per the offer. 3, option agreement to purchase industrial land, Dancor, Phase 3, Oxford Street, Southerly, 10.15 acres, portion of Part 8, 9, 10, and 11 of Plan 33R-19050, Skyway Industrial Park. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the option to purchase agreement submitted by Dancor Phase 3 Oxford Incorporated for an option to purchase until October 31st, 2019 of approximately 10.15 acres of industrial land located on the west side of Robbins Hill Road, described as the southerly portion of Part 8, 9, 10, and 11, Plan 33R-1905. Be accepted. 4, QP Local 101 tentative agreement. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and Chief Human Resources Officer, the Memorandum of Agreement concerning the 2019 to 2022 Collective Agreement for Local Union Number 101, Canadian Union of Public Employees, QP Local 101, representing the inside workers, be ratified. And Mr. Chair, I believe that at this time I need to ask for leave to be given for discussion and debate and the making of substantial motion with respect to clause 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the 18th report of council.
I see, I'll take that as your motion. Councillor Parkus, the seconder. Thank you. We'll come up on screen in a moment.
That's for leave, Mr. Chair.
We'll come up on screen in a moment. Thank you. So just to clarify, this is only for leave, not on any substantive matter at this time?
Yeah, no, I'll go to make the motion if this passes.
So we are voting. Do you want to?
Closing the vote.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the motion to approve clauses 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the 18th report of council.
Councillor, if we could deal with 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll deal with 4 separately to deal with a couple of conflicts that have been, that may
Certainly.
be declared.
We'll do 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3, thank you. Okay, this is on 1, 2, and 3. Are there any speakers? Okay, let's open the vote, call the question, we're voting.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve clause 4 of that report.
Thank you, this is clause 4. I'll look to Deputy Mayor Hubert. Anyone else? Councillor Turner?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll be declaring a pecuniary interest on this as it pertains to QP 101. I'm the Executive Director of Social Service Agency that has contracts with OW, which is staffed by members of QP 101.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. I'll declare the same conflict as I manage employees in QP 101 at my employer, the Middlesex London Health Unit.
Okay, I'll look for any speakers. I have Councillor Morgan. Anyone else?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I wanted to just say thanks to our civic administration as well as the QP 101 executive for the work that they've done in negotiating what I perceive as a fair and balanced new collective agreement. The wage and benefit increases, I think, are respectful to our hardworking and valued employees of the corporation, as well as the taxpayers of the City of London, and I would certainly encourage all of my colleagues to vote for this memorandum.
Other speakers? Okay, there are no additional speakers. Let's call the question that's been moved by, I believe, Councillor Usher. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Van Holst. And we are voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11 with 2 recused.
Great work, everyone.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Great, and thank you again for that extensive reporting out. Let's then move through the agenda. We are at deferred matters. There are none. Inquiries. Deputy Mayor Hubert, Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that BRT has been very much on people's minds, and so I have had an inquiry that has come to me, and people have asked this question. And the question is simply this: what will be the impact of not doing BRT and the associated roadworks on development charges? We had a report back some time ago in 2014, I believe, about roads that need to be widened, and some of that work would be deferred because of the BRT. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to our esteemed city engineer, what do we anticipate? Could you give us some guesstimate of the impact on development charges? And then, of course, I'm not asking you to predict this, but if development charges go up, the cost of new houses go up. Could you help us a little bit with that, please?
Just before Ms. Scher, you answer that question, I'm going to remind all colleagues that we are in the midst of an election. This is our chamber, it's our seat of government. Any discussion that we have in this chamber is devoted specifically on city business, And when we ask staff questions, we expect facts to be provided. And this is, of course, and I don't expect any of us to embark in the political process while we're here, but I'll be very short on any discussion on that issue. I just want to get that out up front, given the timing with which this question is being asked. Ms. Sher.
Mr. Mayor, let me be clear. I want to just ask a question. I'm sitting down.
Okay. Ms. Sher. Again, to you, Deputy Mayor Hubert, not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to all 15 of us, myself included. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have in the 2014 model, which is our most current approved development charges model, $290 million in roadway widening paid for by DCs that would be alleviated by BRT. There are, of course, costs so to BRT as well in the DC model, and that's $100 million direct and $30 million that remain in related to optimization. So the net benefit to the model under the 2014 scenario is $160 million less that's required to be spent by development. Obviously, I'm not an expert on home pricing, but $160 million over the growth scenarios certainly would be to the benefit of a new home buyer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other inquiries? Mr. Asher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to bring up an item, if I could put a picture up on the screen. I have a scenario that one of my constituents asked me about, and they asked me to bring it forward for them. It has to do with property at the corner of Nixon and Eden. And there are two trees just at the corner. One of them happened to be on city's property, and the other happened to be on the owner's property, private property. They're large trees, and they've been dead now for about 5 years. And in 2012, the city identified to the owner, at the time the lady and her son were living there, an elderly lady. She has passed away since. That the city would remove the trees. That was the understanding at the time. Now, the city never did move the tree. They did some construction. They built a retaining wall on the property because the property is a little bit higher than the road on Nixon. And now they're trying to force this gentleman, who is a retired gentleman living there all by himself, to cut the tree, his tree down, so that the city can remove their tree. I have to tell you that these trees are so close together that it's difficult to cut one, to remove one without removing the other. I think it's very unfair. If you look on this, it just shows this as a dot. But the trees, they're massive. They're about 14 to 18 inches in diameter each, and they're very close to each other. My problem, the owner's problem, is that they have a hard time understanding why they have to cut the tree down at this time. And the city want to charge them, they want them to remove the tree immediately. My question through you to staff is, why is it that the city can't take the responsibility to move both trees themselves, even if they have to charge the gentleman the $100 that it would cost?
Mr. Kotsipis.
Through the chair, there's a bit of a history to this. There was a cruise that back in 2012 that we're going to go through and remove a number of trees due to the Emerald Ash Borer program. There are two trees. One is a city tree, one is a private property tree. They are actually one's clearly on city property, the other one is clearly on private property. The tree that was to be removed in 2012 was the city tree, and there was an actual notification provided to the owner regarding that. However, at that time, there was construction in the area, so that prevented the crews from going onto the street to actually remove the tree on the public side of the road. Fast forward to today, the public tree is still slated to be removed. It will be removed shortly. The private property tree is always the responsibility of the private property owner. City crews do not enter on private lands. They do not undertake works on private lands. And that is the distinction between the two. So the city tree will be removed by city forces. The private tree is ultimately the responsibility of the private owner.
Okay, thank you. Question asked, question answered. Thank you. Did you have a follow-up question? Again, I remind you, this is for inquiries.
Yes, but this is an inquiry, Mr. Chair, because this is creating a hardship for this gentleman. These two trees support each other, and the city is going to remove one tree, and the other tree is...
Councillor, I've got to stop you there, and I'm just going to call for order. I'm having trouble hearing myself think.
That's okay.
The purpose of inquiries is to ask questions of staff, to obtain answers. If we're to provide any kind of direction to staff, that's got to go through committee. And inquiries isn't the time in the agenda for us to do that. So I think you've asked your question. It has been answered. You've been provided with the information, whether you agree with it or not. I think that's something that can be discussed at a later date, but you do have your answer.
So my last inquiry then is the gentleman would like to know what steps he can take to ensure of the safety of his tree after the city removes this.
And that's fair. So we'll go to Ms. Scher for that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just conferring with my colleague, I was unaware of the situation prior to tonight. We do work around trees that are entwined regularly, and we do have procedures that we do undertake to ensure that the tree that is remaining remains in place. If there's a need for both trees to come out at the same time, and obviously that could happen during the work, that would just be taken care of and be done if that were the case. I can follow up with you with more information after this, but I need to confer with Urban Forestry.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you very much, Ms. Scher. Other inquiries? Okay, let's move on. Emergent motions. There are none. So let's move to bylaws. In terms of the bylaws, we have some addeds, 595 through 600. And we also need to call bylaw 593 separately, based on a conflict that was declared. So why don't we deal with the bulk of the bylaws, working our way through 581 through to 600 with the exception of 593. First reading, moved by Councillor Usher, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. We'll just wait for that to come up on screen. Okay, we're going to open up first reading. All bylaws, including the addeds, with the exception of 593. We're voting. We'll add those on.
We'll add it.
We're missing some bylaws. What's the best way to do it?
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, we'll do second reading. There were some bylaws that were inadvertently missed in that motion, and I'm going to ask the clerk to speak to that so it's on record. It'll be noted as well.
Yes, Your Worship, our apologies for that. I have noted that it will be corrected in the minutes, and we are correcting it in the second and the third reading.
Second reading, every bylaw with the exception of 593, moved by Councillor Zafin, second by Councillor Park. Any speakers, any discussion? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Third reading, all bylaws with the exception of 593. Moved by Councillor Usher, seconded by Councillor Zafin. Let's call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. My apologies to my colleagues for my tardy arrival today. I was caught up in an appointment with one of my children, and I did not anticipate we would have a meeting quite this quick. So doing my best to slow it down. I did not have the opportunity to declare a pecuniary interest on bylaw 593 due to the fact that I have an interest in properties in the vicinity. So I'm going to declare that conflict right now.
Thank you. Just in the nick of time, Councillor. I'm glad we were able to cover that off. First reading for bylaw 593, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Ridley, maybe? No? Councillor Zafman. We'll call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 2 recused.
Second reading, moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any discussion? Okay, let's call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 2 recused.
And third reading on our final bylaw for the meeting. I think it's only appropriate that Councillor Usher moves this because it is 5:15, which is normally when we'd be coming out of council or out of closed session because of the Usher principle. So thank you for moving that. Seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 2 recused.
Well, that's it. I hope everyone has a very relaxing next week or so and take some time just to recharge, regenerate, and we'll see you all back in about 2 weeks. When our council committees resume. I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Any discussion? Okay, go get him, everybody. All those in favor? Motion carries.